To tell the story of what could be the most outlandish physical creation in drag racing history, we have to start by telling the story of the mind and the man who built it. Jim Lytle grew up in Michigan as a curious, mechanically minded kid. He showed himself to be a talented tinkerer and mechanic, but when he was 15 years old, something happened that changed the course of his life. He attended the Gold Cup hydroplane races on the Detroit River, and it was there he saw something that immediately captured him. The top hydroplanes of the day used giant piston aircraft engines, typically Allison V12s, to make their horsepower. The sound, the spray, and the fury did something to this young kid. Now fast forward just 3 years, the fledgling NHRA is having a sanctioned event in Livonia, Michigan. Jim was there. So were the Arfons boys with Green Monster 2, their Allison-powered, all-conquering drag machine. The course of Jim Lytle's hot-rodding life had been set. We fast forward to 1961. The world learns of the existence of Jim Lytle in the May issue of Hot Rod magazine that year. His immaculate Hemi-powered Ford Coupe, a car he had built while in the Army, which brought him to Texas in the first place, was featured in this story. The car was flawless in every detail, and at the track it could run with the best of them. It showed well, it ran well, and it summed up Lytle's skill set perfectly. Now here's a detail that tells you something about this guy. At 24 years old, he had already owned 26 cars. Later that year, while talking to a fellow hot rodder, airplane engines came up. Overhearing the conversation, another man told Lytle that there was a junkyard down the road that had a couple of the engines they were speaking about. Jim was planning on placing a big Buick engine in the chopped 1934 Ford Tudor sedan he was building, but this conversation changed everything. One trip to the junkyard, and $100 later, he owned a V12 Allison aircraft engine. Now, before we go any further, we need to talk about these Allison engines and why they mattered. The Allison V1710 was a 60-degree V12 that displaced 1,710 cubic inches. That's 28 liters out of 12 cylinders. Single overhead cam, liquid-cooled, and these things made anywhere from 1,000 to 1,600 horsepower in military trim, depending on the variant. War emergency power versions pushed past 2,300. Modified for unlimited hydroplane racing, they could hit 3,000 horsepower. And here's the thing that made all of this possible for guys like Lytle. In 1965, you could buy these things all day long for $50 to $150 at surplus auctions. That works out to roughly 5 cents per horsepower. The post-war surplus market had created this brief window where military hardware was absurdly cheap, and if you had the skills to make it work, the power was basically free. So after about 6 months of work and $1,000 in parts, that Allison engine was powering Jim Lytle's 1934 Ford Tudor sedan. Now he called it Big Al, and he needed somewhere to prove it worked. How about the 1962 AHRA Nationals in Dallas? On his first attempt down the drag strip, the car destroyed the clutch, went 77 miles per hour, and sent Jim back to the drawing board. But here's where you start to see what kind of guy Lytle was. On his own, working through the problem, he created drag racing's first 4-disc clutch. He also scratch-made the 14-inch diameter torque tube that tied the front of the car to the rear axle. This thing also acted as a flywheel shield and helped keep the massive torque of the Allison from twisting the car into 2 pieces. The man had a problem, and he solved it himself with parts that didn't exist until he made them. In early 1963, Jim showed up at Lyons Drag Strip. The car ran 11s at 133 miles per hour and landed on the pages of the famed Drag News magazine that year. He relocated to Southern California in 1964, and eventually Big Al was running 10.56 at 147 miles per hour. But there was a massive problem. The air pressure building up inside the body would cause the doors to rip open, the hood to fly off, and Jim to reconsider all of his life choices at 150 miles an hour. The man needed a one-piece body, but he didn't know how to make one. But Fred Carroll knew how. Carroll owned and operated Fibercraft Filaments, the leading fiberglass components company of the day. Lytle met him in the pits and asked if it was even possible to make a one-piece fiberglass sedan body. Carroll said it was not only possible, but he'd help Lytle in the process. He sold Jim all his materials at cost and answered any questions that came up along the way. Jim, the man who could do it all, proceeded with gusto. He built a 5-piece mold off his existing car with one change. The Tudor, which had already been chopped 6 inches, got chopped another 6 inches. This dropped the roof so low that Lytle could have his head sticking out the top of it for the best visibility. And no, we're not kidding. The windows were all cosmetic and basically 1 inch tall. 5 months later, the one-piece fiberglass body painted in Bahama blue and finished in what looked to be near flawless shape was mounted on the chassis. The whole works was put on display at the 1964 NHRA Winter Nationals car show. Now, it needs to be said, this was the first one-piece fiberglass sedan body in the world. Little fiberglass sports cars, sure, those had been around, but this lift-off body would reverberate far beyond the Pomona walls. Fran Hernandez, who at that time ran Ford's experimental division, saw this car at the show. In the 1980s, he would admit that when he was pressed by management in 1965 to find a way to compete with the Chrysler Hemi cars on the drag strip, this car and this body served as the direct inspiration for the first lift-off funny car bodies ever made in 1966. If you want further proof, consider the fact that at the beginning, those 1966 factory funny cars had bodies that lifted straight off the chassis. They were not hinged in the back like funny cars are today, just like Jim did it. So, how did Big Al 2 do at the track with its new body? At 2,850 pounds, packing 2,300 horsepower worth of Allison and all the improvements of the one-piece body, it had to be better at the drag strip, right? Oh, it was. Big time. The car ran 9.31 at 163 miles per hour on its best pass with Jim at the wheel. This was nearly a full second and 15 miles per hour better than any full-bodied car on the planet at that time. He changed the oil once a year. He never changed the spark plugs, he never broke anything, and he never lifted. Jim Lytle made 9 runs at Lyons Drag Strip over the course of July 1964 and then sold the car on the spot to Ray Alley for $2,000, making a small profit in the process. Alley toured the car in 1965 and 1966, then sold it to Tex Collins in 1967, and we'll get to that guy in a minute. So, why did Lytle sell it? The man was an inveterate builder and mechanic, but he wasn't necessarily a racer. In fact, by the winter of 1964, before Big Al 2 had ever seen the track, he already had another project in mind. Quoting Lytle in the May 1964 issue of Popular Hot Rodding, he says, "My next project, which will begin as soon as I'm able to locate additional Allison engines at a reasonable price, will be a 4-engine competition coupe, 8,000 horsepower, 9,200 foot-pounds of torque, 6,840 cubic inches, and a weight of 7,000 pounds. Engines will be linked to pairs by the use of truck flywheels and driven through 5-disc clutches. 2 engines will drive the front 10-inch dual slicks and 2 the rear. I feel I'm part of a dying breed of the do-it-yourself school of hot rodding. With the present-day facilities, 98% of the rodders are assemblers, not builders. The only thing I shop out is lathe work, and the day I buy my own lathe, I'll do 100% of my own work." Ralph Gall ends his story with this: "The question in your mind from the foregoing is this guy for real?" Well, Jim does have a sturdy imagination, but I remember when he outlined the plans for the just as improbable Big Al 2, and he had the same look in his eye. This brings us to the Quad Al. After selling Big Al 2, Jim launched full bore into this absolutely wild project. He crafted a plastic model first to serve as a guide on the build, using 4 Allison V12 model kits and a Fiat Topolino coupe kit. And that model turned out to be eerily close to what the finished product would look like. Over the course of a 6-month build, he made the exact thing he had teased Popular Hot Rodding with. And boy, did he ever.
The finished Quad Al was one of the most visually arresting automobiles ever made. A 160-inch wheelbase, 4 massive Allison V12 engines in a row, the almost comically small Cal Automotive fiberglass coupe body, 37 Fiat 500 Topolino, sitting on top of 8 slicks. The sheer scope of this thing is enough to make a hot rodder well up with joy. To a point. Now let's get into the technical stuff, because this is where it gets wild. The engine configuration was specific. The front pair of Allisons faced backward, the rear pair faced forward, tilted 15 degrees to align the throttle linkage. Lytle had planned to mesh the engines together using Model 450 International truck flywheels, and he managed to do that. But he had to lay the engines over at that 15-degree angle and perform a lot of work on the front accessory drives to get the mesh to actually happen. 2 left-hand rotation and 2 right-hand rotation engines were used. He made 18-inch diameter torque tubes to tie the car together front to rear. He had planned on using hydraulically operated 6-disc clutches that sent the power to a rear axle using 2 1957 Pontiac center sections with 2.41 gears. Those center sections were made with Ford 1.5-ton truck ends, axles, and hubs. Up front, the steer axle came from a 2.5-ton military truck, also to be geared at that 2.41 ratio. It had massive Repa CV joints on the ends for steering. Now, how did the steering actually happen? A 1965 Buick steering box was connected with a 14-foot-long steering shaft to the cockpit. Yeah! The frame rails were made of 3-inch square tubing that was a 1/4-inch thick. The roll cage area was 2-inch square tubing that was also a 1/4-inch thick. The car was literally built like a battle tank. The wheels were custom-made with Quinn steel plate center sections that Lytle welded up himself. Now listen to this: 96 exhaust pipes, 4 magnetos, and the most amazing stat of all, the car used a combined total of 350 feet of Packard 440 spark plug wire to get it all lit off. The throttle was an act of engineering in and unto itself, with all the engines throttled together through a series of bell cranks and linkages. 4 Stromberg 2-barrel carburetors provided 40-pound flow capacity each. 48 cylinders, 6,840 cubic inches total, nearly 7,000 pounds of machine. Moon Equipment donated the fuel tanks. Champion spark plugs provided special unshrouded racing plugs, the same ones developed for Allison hydroplanes. Cal Automotive provided the Topolino body. Total investment when the car sat mechanically complete? Approximately $2,000. $2,000 for the most powerful piston-engine car ever conceived. So what did it run? This car, this machine that you have undoubtedly seen all over the internet for years, never moved an inch under its own power. Not a single inch of wheel-driven forward progress has ever been made by the Quad Al. So what the heck happened? Money, that's what happened. Lytle was a regular guy with a regular job as a design draftsman. He made about $110 a week. When he got to the point of the clutches, the custom ring and pinion gears, and other final details, he was looking at $5,000 in 1960s money. That's about $50,000 today, and that was not at all in his budget. The outlandish drag car of all time had been stopped by sane financial decision-making. It's actually true. The irony is brutal when you think about it. 12,000 horsepower worth of surplus aircraft engines cost less than $500. The precision components to harness them, the clutches, the gears, the ring and pinions, cost 10 times that. The golden era of drag racing celebrated the shade tree builder who could outthink the factories. Jim Lytle proved you could build the world's most powerful piston-engine car in your shop for $2,000. What he couldn't do was afford the machine work to finish it. In late 1965, Tex Collins, the now owner of Big Al II, a guy who had a dozen Allison engines himself, including an Allison-powered Mustang funny car, bought the Quad Al and the trailer for $4,000. Lytle once again made a small profit. Collins was a Hollywood stuntman who would later purchase Cal Automotive in 1967. He had the means to finish the car. Except that didn't happen.
Now, what happened to Tex Collins gets murky. He was killed in October 1976 under disputed circumstances. He was 49 years old. Some accounts describe a business franchise dispute. Others mention a debt collection gone wrong. His son, Frank, has stated publicly that no one has actually told it correctly regarding his father's death. After Collins died, his widow sold all 12 of his Allison engines separately. The Quad Al chassis somehow remained intact and began passing through owners. 2 California racing brothers, a gentleman in Nebraska, a collector named Cy Kubista, then Wally Miller in Wisconsin. In 1994, a collector named Mike Guffey from Hartford City, Indiana, acquired the Quad Owl from Miller. By then, only the frame, the wheels, and the dual bell housings remained. Everything else had been stripped or lost over 3 decades. Now here's where the economics had completely reversed themselves. Those Allison V12s that cost $50 to $150 in 1965? By the mid-1990s, they were worth approximately $30,000 each. The surplus era was over. The engines that made the Quad Owl possible for $2,000 were now worth more than $100,000 as a set. Guffey wanted to restore the car, but the economics made a functional restoration impossible. Real Allisons at $30,000 each meant $120,000 just for engines, 60 times what Lytle spent building the entire car. So Guffey did something else. He placed 4 mocked-up Allison engines back in the Quad Owl's frame. They're basically blocks with valve covers and manifolds bolted to them. He sourced a new Topolino fiberglass body, a cosmetic restoration that would let the car be shown in its perpetually unfinished state. How many people own a car that was in the Guinness Book of World Records and was powered by 4 aircraft engines that helped us win World War II? I got a lot of neat stuff, but no other stuff like that. It's a real-life wacky racer. The Guinness reference is accurate. The Quad Owl was listed in the Guinness Book of World Records from 1974 through the late 1980s as the most powerful piston-engine car ever built. The record stood for over a decade, for a car that never moved under its own power. Now, people talk about the car being 12,000 horsepower, and it was touted as such on magazine covers back in the day. But look, it's all academic. The engines were never dyno tested in this configuration. Stock military Allisons made 1,000 to 1,600 horsepower. The 3,000 horsepower per engine figure comes from modified racing variants. Whether 4 of them in the Quad Owl would have actually produced 12,000 combined horsepower is unknowable. They were never fired in the chassis. It could be listed as 100,000 horsepower, but in reality, your lawnmower has more operable power than this cartoonishly incredible-looking machine. Jim Lytle never saw the Quad Owl run, but before his death in 2011, he learned that Guffey had acquired the car and was restoring it. There's something in that, knowing your creation survived, even if it never did what you built it to do. After selling the Quad Owl in 1965, Lytle kept building. By 1967, he was working as a fabricator on the crew that built the STP turbine Indy car for Andy Granatelli at the Paxton Division shop in Santa Monica. The same skills that produced the Quad Owl were recognized at the highest levels of motorsport engineering. Eventually, Lytle moved to Hawaii, where he ran an auto repair shop for more than 20 years. He passed away in 2011. The Big Owl 2 body, the one with the flip-top design that influenced funny car development, survives at the Don Garlits Museum of Drag Racing in Ocala, Florida. That's Lytle's lasting contribution to the sport. Not the 12,000 horsepower that never moved, the body design that helped shape an entire class. The Quad Owl sits today in Mike Guffey's collection in Indiana. It's been displayed at events like the Ducktail Run in Gas City. If you were around the Southern California scene in the mid-60s and saw this car at a shop or a show before Tex Collins hauled it away, that memory might be one of the only eyewitness accounts left. And that's the whole weird story on the drag racing monster that never turned a tire in anger, the Quad Owl. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more historical automotive content.